Welcome to the Single Era Diaries, exploring the journey of a woman who hasn't experienced what it's like to be single in her entire adult life, and pretty much most of her teenage life too. Each episode will navigate the journey of finding a sense of identity, exploring the challenges of co-parenting, finding love of self and healing, all whilst tackling the complexities of the checkered landscape of dating and dating apps, meeting new people, and operating solo in a world that celebrates couples, marriage, and codependency. I am your host, founder of Nascent Media and newly single woman, Jade, and this is the diary of my single era. So on this week's episode of the Single Era Diaries, I really want to get into the art of good communication and the art of good communication when dating, because what I'm finding is that it's evidently a lost art, at least in what I've largely experienced so far. Save for a really small number of guys who I feel genuinely quite fortunate to have connected with in what I can only describe as being an absolute hellscape of dating apps. So let's get into it. Communicating and communication is an art, and it's an art form that is supported by lots of nuances that we have typically in our day-to-day life. When we're speaking with people, we usually have the context of an environment, we've usually got the joy of body language, we've hopefully got some kind of context from whatever environment that we're in. There's all of these different things that go with it. But communicating in a digital landscape without the subtext of common ground and any real connection is a real challenge. And let me be clear, I am in no way claiming to have this art down. I am really as clueless, if not more clueless, than anyone else who might be in a similar situation right now. So I have to say that for the most part, having spent around 3-4 weeks now semi-active in the dating app hellscape, it's really my view that these apps are not doing any favours for most people when it comes to communicating. But I also feel that anybody that isn't naturally charismatic in real life, that communicating or trying to connect and communicate with people on these apps is really going to put you at a bit of a disadvantage. And here's what I'm thinking. This is based so far on the short-term experience that I've had within what is now my life, and apparently a bit of a research study too. So communicating with people on these apps, these people are, for all intents and purposes, they're actually complete strangers. They're complete unknown quantities. You've got close to zero context about the person that you're speaking to or trying to speak to. You've got very little context about, what they're about and what they're into, beyond a few profile pictures and maybe a handful of witty comments or a short synopsis about that person and their lives. You don't really have a great deal to go off. So from the outset, you're not only dealing with that, but you're also in competition for attention from someone who you don't know, you like the look of, but your dating profile is one of hundreds, if not thousands, of potentially competing suitors and matches. So you're competing for time, you're competing for focus, and you're doing all of this in the context of being a stranger on somebody's phone where they obviously, or at least you would hope, have a life outside of their phone. And so with all of that, that's your setting. You're then somehow expected to be able to make a good enough first impression that leads through entertaining a conversation using the medium of text alone, which, as we know, lacks the additional qualities of human interaction. So from there, your aim is to decide, using this very small amount of information that you have about the other person, whether you possibly like each other enough to invest time and energy into getting to know that person beyond the photographs and the couple of witty comments, and to then actually go and meet that person in person. And you're supposed to decide all of that out quite quickly, because if you don't decide it quickly enough, then the momentum disappears and then you're right back at the start again. Go figure. Can we all agree that that sounds like a pretty tall order? I mean, it is a tall order. I'm living it right now. It's a really tall order. So having now set the scene for precisely what it is that anybody using these apps is up against, let's unpack together the range of joyous experiences that I've had so far to suggest that the art of communication on these apps is one that I fear I'm not alone in being unable to understand. I've shared in previous episodes that the main dating app that I've been using so far has been Hinge, the Hinge dating app. I've had some mixed success. Success is probably too strong a word for what I've experienced so far. Let's just say that the experience has been mixed. Let's just go with that. I can definitely attest to how hard it feels to try and showcase your personality on this app without wanting to come across as too keen or too cheesy or too quirky or too weird or any of the other sacrilege qualities that I'm steadily learning are considered to be dating world faux pas. What I have to say is that for the most part, and this is and has very much been my experience, but for the most part, the introductory message received at the point of matching with somebody can really serve as the make or break in whether I'm prepared to invest time in getting to attempt to know a person. I mean, as well as you can know somebody that is a stranger from the internet that you have very little information about. So before I go further, I think it's worthwhile getting an understanding of how, as a woman, the experience of being on these apps will differ for me in comparison to male users of the app. And I can only speak, of course, from my own experience as a straight woman using the app and the data that I've researched in relation to those parameters. There's interestingly a site that I have happened across in researching this episode called swipestats.io. I mean, of course there is. Of course there's a site that will allow you as a dating app user to go online and find out even more data to analyse about your dating app experience. And so the person that came up with Swipe Stats is somebody called Christian Bow. And according to Christian, the dynamics of the dating world for men and women on these apps is completely different. Women can reportedly find it far easier to match with men they're interested in, yet for men, the environment is apparently much more challenging. Women have got more advances, they receive more advances from men, which I can very much attest to. In my own experience, I had to come off the app to begin with because I felt so overwhelmed by it. It felt like an avalanche of men falling from a virtual sky attempting to match, and it was just very like, oh my actual god, this is way too intense. And the result is that women are matching or swiping far more than men are doing overall, because they've obviously got many more advances, but they're much more selective than men are. So the analysis that Swipe Stats positions is that women are matching just 1 in 20 people, whereas men are matching or swiping yes much more often, which I don't think that's massively surprising. I wasn't hugely surprised when I found that stat. But the data also suggests that women are only matching on a handful of men per day. Men are, and this is a direct quote, much more freewheeling and frivolous. They're much more gregarious with their matches and swipes, which again means that, so you as a woman, you're getting more potential matches, you're matching with far fewer of them, you're being much more discerning and considered when you're matching, and you're connecting with people who are matching left, right and centre. So the guy that you have connected a match with, he is one of a few for you, but you are one of many for him. That's the upshot, I think. And that means that the result is really highly competitive. Men are finding it more challenging to make the matches. They're, trying to, go through more people. Women are whittling that down and having a much smaller number. I mean, the median female user receives 2.75 matches per day and the median male user around 1.1 matches a day. But even whilst those matches are going through, the guy is probably still swiping or still matching or still looking. And you as the woman, and this at least in my own experience, you're like, oh, no, I'm done now. That's enough. So then once you've gone through that process, you've then got the challenge of a match, not necessarily leading to an interaction. So matching on these apps is only one part of the story. Once you've matched, you then need to move into communicating and actually having an exchange back and forth. And that's where this part can become fundamentally disappointing, because if you imagine like a funnel, like you've kind of taken these matches down from, like, there's hundreds of them, and then you've sort of whittled it all the way down. Men are reportedly messaging much more frequently than women. Women are receiving on average 7 messages per day, but they're only sending out 4 to 5 messages a day. So the men are really busily there, sort of, chatting, trying to get through. The women are again sort of, a little bit more pet back. So before you even manage to move into an actual communication, you're in a hellscape where there's a smaller number of women that are being kind of fought over or competed for the attention for by a larger group of men. And according to the research, and what I would certainly echo in my own experience, as a woman, I'm really selective about the people that I'm prepared to match with, like super selective. It could also be down to the fact that I've spent a lot of years working in HR and search and recruitment, where part of that process when you're hiring people, you have to go from like thousands of applications, whittle it down to a long list, whittle down the long list to a short list, then go into interview rounds. Like, I'm very used to that process, and I've applied the same approach when it's come to this dating app experience. I'm like, gosh, there's all of these matches. No, yes, and it funnels down really quickly. I guess, though, the next challenge is then, once you've whittled that down and knowing that you are one of many that somebody's speaking to, and the person that you're speaking to is also, one of several or one of many, it's then actually being able to communicate in the digital form. That's when the next layer of complexity kicks in. So there's an art form apparently to this. I don't understand it. I really don't understand it. I want to start, I guess, by giving some colour and context around the narrative here. I wanted to share some personal numbers from my dating app experience, because I think that will help to really depict what it is that the average woman on these apps is dealing with. So I've mentioned that I'm using the Hinge dating app. Also, this suggestion of a friend, I've now moved on to using Bumble as well. So I'm using Bumble as well. And I mean, in terms of entertaining Bumble, so far it's been quite brief. It's been a horrid dalliance, is what I would say. I'm really not enjoying it. And on Hinge, though, currently, in terms of what I've got by way of numbers, this is just to kind of paint that picture. I've currently got 20 active matches, and that feels like a lot. 20 potential like that, even saying that out loud is like 20 people. Can you imagine if 20 people turned up at your door to take you out for a date on one occasion? Like, it's that I have going on in my mind. So that's 20 people that are in my active match space, and I'm in active dialogue with like 2 of those people. It was 3, but I cancelled a date this weekend that was planned for this week, simply because the guy was just not my jam. I mean, I think you just know, don't you, whether people are on your wavelength or not? And I just knew that this guy was not. So that means that I'm in active dialogue with just 2 guys. But in addition to that 20 that are sort of active, that I'm technically, in inverted, I'm doing finger quotes here, that I'm in active dialogue with, I've also got an additional 25 hidden inactive chats. And those are there because Hinge basically hides profiles of people that you have been inactive with, so not talking with on the app, after 14 days. Now, that's not to say that there are people in there that you might have gone off app with. You might have shared your phone number and then you're speaking with them on WhatsApp rather than on the app. But if you don't then go in and actively unhide that profile, they will go into your hidden chat. So I've got 25 hidden people, 20 active people, 2 of which I'm actually in active dialogue with. So the reason why those people go into hidden for me personally is because they've started chatting with me and I've just been bored by them. I've just not found them interesting. Their chat has been lacking and I'm just like, meh. And I can't even necessarily be bothered to go back on and unmatch them. But people do unmatch. There's been a few people that I have been in conversation with where I've gone back onto the app a day or 2 later, because I don't go on there every day because I have a life. And when I have gone back on, the people that I'm chatting with, they aren't there any longer. And so I'm assuming that they have unmatched me, perhaps because they just decide that they're not into me and I'm not their jam, and that's cool. Or it could be because I haven't gone back to them quickly enough. And I do wonder whether that is one of the things that people can kind of take umbrage about, that people aren't responding to them straight away. And I'll say this as well, because on Bumble, where people have matched me and I haven't been back onto the app for like 2 days afterwards, I'll go back into the message thread and it will have the original message and then like a question mark and then like maybe like a weird gif or something underneath it, and I'm just like, are you just sitting on the app waiting for people to reply? Like, do you not have other things going on? Go outside, go for a walk, do something. So that's Hinge. That's a sort of number that I've got going on Hinge. And I'm not saying this to brag at all. It probably doesn't sound braggy to a lot of people. I'm sure there are people listening to this and going, oh, you've only got 20 people, that's not a lot. You know what, it feels like a lot to me. And yeah. But then over on Bumble, which I really dislike Bumble. I'm actually going to delete the app altogether because I'm not vibing with it. But over on Bumble, there's a lot more activity and the number terrifies the life out of me. So there's currently, at last check, there were 735 people who had liked me. I'm just going to let that sink in because that's a lot of people. Like, that's a ridiculous number. 735. And those are people that have liked my profile, that the premise of the app now would be that I would go back on and I would sort of match with them or unmatch with them. Absolutely nuts. Within that, there are 3 chats that are apparently about to expire soon. The way that Bumble works is it is very gamified as an app, and it really tries to push you to be on the app and push you to communicate, which I can kind of see the rationale behind doing that, because it's of course to give a sense of momentum so that things are moving along and that the conversation doesn't stagnate, which that can happen and it's pretty rubbish when it does. But it also means that if you do have a life outside the app and you're doing other things, that the app is making a decision for you and deciding that you're obviously not interacting with these people enough, and then the chat will expire and you're no longer in a match with them. So I've got 3 chats that are about to expire, and in terms of the actual chats that I've got going on where there are conversations that have started, but I'm just so bored now that I've just not gone back to any of them. I think there's like 10 chats that aren't about to expire that are just sat there. And so in addition to that, I've got a couple of people who I have moved off app with. So literally like 2, it was 3 people, but as mentioned, one of those people I cancelled the date with, and he was quite aggressive in response and a little bit stroppy. And so I don't talk with him anymore. So I've got a couple of people that I chat with off WhatsApp who are genuinely, they seem like, really thoroughly lovely people. And yeah, I mean, that's quite cool. Lots of guys that I've found so far in my experience go straight in there with wanting to get your number. It's like opening gambit, chat a little bit, ask you for your number. Some people don't even do that. Some people literally on the first chat are like, can I get your number? Do you prefer to chat on WhatsApp? And I'm like, hell no, I don't want to chat on WhatsApp. I give out my number very infrequently. So I've given out my number 3 times in the entire period. So if you're listening to this and you've got my number, there you go, you're doing all right. Because ordinarily I'm just like, no, I don't want to give my number. So that's just to give you some sort of sense of the numbers that I'm dealing with. And I'm a very average woman. There are, I'm sure, some absolutely, stunning, incredible women out there that have probably got numbers that are significantly more than that. And all of this is to really give you a sense of just how challenging it must be to try and meet somebody and to try and kind of move into anything that is meaningful, given that these are the numbers that people are talking with. What I do stand by, though, is that opening gambit is really critical to whether you're going to move into having a conversation or not. If you overcome the hurdle of the opening gambit, from there, it can really be make or break as to whether I'm going to kind of hang around in conversation with you. And this sounds aloof. It sounds like I'm being really aloof. But the fact of the matter is, time is precious. Time is scarce even. Time is valuable. And so you've got to find a mechanism and a means of kind of separating the wheat from the chaff, so to speak. So I'm going to share some of the open gambits that I have experienced. Not the actual wording and not the people, of course, because, that's not a nice thing to do. But just to kind of give like an oversight of the kind of opening gambits that have definitely not work. So if you are a guy that's listening to this, or a gal that's listening to this, and you're pulling any of these stunts and not getting any matches, this, the people that are receiving it could be landing in the way that it's landed for me. So first, absolute no as an opening gambit. Please, for the love of God, do not send poetry. For the love of all that is holy, no poetry. Poetry is not a way to start an interaction with anybody, even if you're a poet. I mean, find another way to talk to somebody. Particularly avoid the Hallmark greeting style poetry from like the 1980s. There's a guy on Hinge. If you're listening to this, you know who you are. Every time you try and match, you send a poem that's along the lines of roses are red, violets are blue, you fell from heaven when I saw you. Like, no. Stop that. It's not going to entice anybody. It's really, really weird and a bit creepy. Very cringe. Don't do it. Over on Bumble, there's a feature where you can, when you match with somebody, you can do like a pre-populated icebreaker. And so these are little questions that I'm sure the clever people at Bumble, they came up with these at Bumble HQ, and they're like, we'll come up with these really cool questions. It will help people to break the ice. It will help to get the conversation going. In my experience, that's a no. It's a no. It doesn't work. And here's an example of what I've received, and then I'll share with you why I think it doesn't work. So one of the questions that was asked of me was, what would you do if I turned up at your door in a dinosaur costume? And I was like, okay, it's a bit different. Let's entertain this. Let's give it a go. And so I wrote back, bravo, well done. Because I probably would say that, like, like pat the guy like on his head like he's a 5-year-old, like, yay, well done, you've turned up in a dinosaur costume. His response, however, was ixom. Like it was just a firm hard pass. And it was, I would say you looked pretty Rexy, but only if you were wearing a T-Rex costume. And that led to me very promptly unmatching. I unmatched pretty much straight away after that. Now, that could come across as being harsh, and I don't care. I really don't care. Because here's the issue that I have with those kind of icebreaker prompts. When you meet people in real life, be it in a bar, a restaurant, a coffee shop, your place of work, your gym, on the golf course, playing tennis, like when you meet people in real life, if you walked over to somebody and without any prelude to that conversation said, what would you do if I turned up at your door in a dinosaur costume? What would you think of that person? You would think that they are nuts. You would think that they are drunk. You would think that they are high. You would think, hell no. And so this is why I really can't get on board with the way that Bumble works with these pre-populated apps, because it's not natural. Like, it's not an organic way to converse with somebody. You wouldn't just wander over to somebody and ask them a random question like that, like, oh, what's your top 5 places that you want to travel? Like, no, you need a little bit of like a lead into the conversation. So in my view, avoid those. If you can think of something to say your big self, then do that. I'm also very, very, very put off by people who want to comment on my looks as an initial opening gambit. I really don't appreciate being told anything to do with like, oh, you're stunning, you're beautiful. One guy was like, oh, you look so good, you're dressed so well, it's like you're dressed up for our date already. And I'm like, no. There's a whole raft of different things that you can pull from to engage in a conversation with me. There's like a whole profile of stuff that's on there that you can use to work with. And the people that have done that are the people that I converse with, actually, where they've just done what I think is just like a pretty decent thing, which is to actually read a little bit about me and then to ask a bit of a question around that. Like, excellent way of starting a conversation. Bravo, good job. So anybody that does that, I'm not into overt flattery. I think there's a lot of women who would just be like, I mean, look, it's fine to like say, oh, you look really nice, but as the opener, it's a bit cheese in my view. I just think no. Another thing that's really put me off is where I've been asked where I live. Couple of things. One, it says on my profile the region that I live in. That's all you need to know. I'm not going to tell you where I live. Like, I don't know you. You're a stranger on the internet. Why are you asking that question? And back to my first point, it says on my profile already. Like, read the damn profile. It says. It's just really lazy. Sending voice notes right from the outset. So there is a feature, I don't know whether it has it on Bumble, I haven't spent enough time on there to see, but there is a feature on Hinge where you can either send a voice note or you can have a video call. And I quite like voice notes. I send voice notes to my friends all the time. Some friends are really into voice notes, some friends are not into voice notes, and I never get a voice note back. I think it's quite nice because you then get to kind of hear a little bit more of the person. It's kind of like just getting a voicemail. And I'm an elder millennial. I'm old school. We used to phone one another back in the day, like using your voice to converse and to communicate with somebody feels like a natural thing to do. I know it's not, down with the kids these days, but there we go. So I quite like voice notes, but I found those that use voice notes too frequently and too early. It's not panned out well. There was one guy who I was talking with for a few days actually, whose initial opening voice notes were to talk to me about a speech that he had attended by Mr. Motivator. Mr. Motivator, sort of like 90s, like Good Morning Britain, or what it was. He used to be like an exercise person on there that used to do exercise and stuff. Yeah, that was his opening gambit. And I was like, oh, okay, that's different. Let's go for that. I mean, there's a bit of a theme here. Anybody that's kind of, a bit different does something just a little bit more like thoughtful. I'm like, oh, okay, you've got a little bit of charisma. Good job. But this guy was a no. It was a bit of a no. So those are the things that have definitely not worked. The things that have worked are, I feel like it's really, really clear when people have got something about them. Charisma, personality, confidence, not arrogance, just like nice confidence about them. I really feel that you can spot that a mile off because the chat is thoughtful, it's considered, they've read your profile, they start a conversation off with something that they've read or listened to on your profile. They typically have good manners, they're not cringy, they're not creepy, they don't dive straight into conversations about your look straight away. And as the conversations develop, they don't do a couple of things that I've had with people that I've spoken to on here that have been massively off-putting. So they don't ask things like, how long have you been on the app for? How many dates have you been on? How terrible has your experience been? It's like, dude, that is not the way to start this interaction. What, we're going to start it off on a low footing of all of the bad things that have happened? Like, no, let's not start from there. Let's start from somewhere else. And the other thing that I've really lost any desire to want to continue talking is when somebody dives into the X-Files, which seems to be a theme. There's a lot of guys that I've experienced that straight away, like very early doors, they're talking about their exes and their situation and the things that have happened to them. And I empathise and I feel for them, but I also don't care. I don't want to talk about that at this early juncture because, again, it's not organic. It's not how romantic relationships typically unfold. I don't believe that you would, on the second interaction with somebody, tell them all about how you and your ex broke up. I just find it a bit oversharey. It makes me feel a little bit uncomfortable, and I really don't want to get into that so early on. I'd much rather just focus on the moment and kind of living that and enjoying that. And, what have you been up to? What are you doing? Like, just like cool chat like that. Don't open the X-Files too early. Please avoid if possible. So with all of that said, you might be wondering where all of this has actually managed to get me so far. And I would say that it's not far at all. It's not far at all. In summary, after this experiment that appears to be my life right now, I've had one in-person date, which, as we all know, is an absolute shit show. I've learned a lot from that, though, in terms of how to behave, how to communicate, crucially to take it slow, not to overshare, to heed the red flags head on, avoid them rather than running towards them. Like, red flags are to be avoided, Jade, not to be run towards, okay? I've had a video date, which was dreadful. It was so dreadful. I felt like I was being interviewed. I felt like I was on an interview and the guy was wearing Crocs, which, for anybody that knows me, knows that I despise Crocs. I don't care how comfortable they might be, or that Hailey Bieber or whoever else wears them. Crocs are hideous. They're not to be trusted, and anyone with any modicum of style whatsoever understands that the only acceptable, comfortable footwear of choice is a Birkenstock. Tell me I'm wrong and I'll show you the door. Seriously. Anyway, video dates are, in my view, supremely lazy. We're not in lockdown. Unless you live in a different country or a different region of the country, I feel that it is perfectly reasonable to make a plan, make a date, set a date, meet in person, see whether there is a vibe, in person, simple. We are humans. we need to see whether we can vibe energetically. Doing that over a video call, like, no, it's a no from me on that. I've also been invited out on several dates, which I have accepted and then not progressed further with making arrangements because I just feel like it's a no. I just feel like I have enough personal discernment now to know as to whether somebody's going to be on my level or not. Like, I can just tell that a million miles off. And so for those that I just think, no, I'm just not going to make that arrangement. And then there's another that I, as mentioned earlier, I should have been having a date on Tuesday, and the guy was just overly keen. I'm not into overly keen. I mean, it was like messaging all the time. Have you found a date yet? Have you got availability yet? Like, really keen. And the guy lived in Coventry. I live in Worcestershire, so it was a bit of a schlep for him to get over. And he was like, I can come to you. Where can you recommend? Like, okay, fine. You know, chivalrous enough, I guess. But I just felt like my intuition was like, no. And then when I cancelled the date, it turned out that my intuition was bob on the money, because I cancelled and he was actually quite aggressive. I sent a really lovely note on Saturday morning just saying, thanks so much for the invite out on Tuesday. I am going to have to cancel those plans because I've got heaps on at the moment with work, which I really do. And I'm just not in that headspace right now. So wishing you a really lovely summer and the very best of luck in finding somebody. And he literally messaged back like a minute later, like, what? Out of the blue, found somebody else, with a follow-up message, basically stating that he was so incredibly busy and he was prepared to make all of these shifts to his schedule in order to meet me, in order to come over to see me. And I was just like, well, there you go. There you go. Can you imagine what it would have been like if I would have said no to a second date, if that's how unchill he was after my cancelling? And then I then got another message a little while later, about an hour or so later, asking if we could reschedule. And then I then got a final message about an hour or so later after that, just saying, sorry, the cancellation came out of the blue for him and he wished me all the best. And I was like, okay, dodged a bullet there. Dodged a bullet, which is lovely. So yeah, so that's where I'm up to, really. A bunch of not cool stuff. I've got one other date that I'm genuinely really looking forward to, and it should have happened already, but it's rescheduled. I mean, I think it's rescheduled. I don't fully, I mean, I think it has. Like, I've got a rescheduled date, and I really would love it, actually, if it were to happen, because the guy seems like a really lovely guy, and I'm just like, yeah, I could have a beer with you. Like, you know, very cool, very chill, very relaxed, very, you know, seems like a decent, like, fairly hinged person. Doesn't feel unhinged at all. But the problem with that, of course, now is that I'm in this sort of space where I don't understand the rules of the game. There's apparently these so-called rules where I'm not supposed to text first. I'm not supposed to text first. I'm not supposed to message first. I'm not supposed to over message. I'm not supposed to text too frequently. I'm not supposed to respond too quickly. I mean, all of this is according to both the internet, advice on dating, and friends. And I mean, I've even gone to the extent of, there's this dating expert called Matthew Hussey, who you may or may not have heard of. I've actually gone to the extent of downloading one of his like pack things on like how to communicate when dating online, because this is completely new to me and I don't want to in any way come over as too keen, but I'm also conscious of the fact that I might be coming off as too cool. And I'm like, everybody wants to be the cool girl, but you also want to let the person know that you think, yeah, like, I actually, like, this could maybe go somewhere. I don't. How can you decide whether something can go somewhere where you haven't actually met a person? This is the minefield that you're in. What I will also say is, who the hell came up with these rules? Who came up with them? It feels impossible, especially, you know, as somebody who, I think the challenge when you've been in a relationship is that you are used to a cadence of communication. You're used to a way of communicating that is like a fairly constant undercurrent. and you message in the morning, and you message maybe at lunchtime, or you have a call at lunchtime, and you speak at the end of the day and you ask how your day was, and then you get home and you've still got more things to talk about. Whereas when you're in this sort of limbo, like you're not even dating, you're not in a relationship, there's nothing, you don't have any formal agreement with this person. And so it's like, well, do I message them to ask how their weekend was? Is that over egging it a little bit? Are they going to be like, why are you messaging me? Like, I don't know. There's all of this like sort of nuance to it. And I really wish that I knew the answers, because I think when you do, the way that I see it is that when we think about the sort of the macro of this dating world, and we think about the numbers, we think about how many people it takes, how many thousands of people are using these apps, and you whittle it all the way down to where you're talking with a couple of people. And I think if you've managed to find any form of sort of connection, to the extent that like you've got things in common and there's things that you kind of like that are similar, and you seem to have a similar temperament and pay, and I just think if you found that, then really you should invest in it, because it could go somewhere. But then it's investing in it without being cringeworthy or too keen or too cool or too aloof, or like there's all of this stuff. And that's the art that I really don't understand. I don't understand that art. And so if anybody has any advice, then like the contact information is in the show notes. I would really like to figure out how to do this better, because it does kind of feel, it kind of feels a bit impossible at the moment. I mean, I know certainly that I'm one of dozens of people that the people I'm speaking to are speaking to. And so you don't know where you are in the pecking order. You don't know where you are in their priority. Like myself as a busy mum and businesswoman, and, juggling everything, managing a house on my own, a home on my own, with a daughter and a business and all of this stuff. Like I'm busy, and I know that the people I'm talking to are busy, but I also know that there's other people vying for that attention. And so that also makes it more complex, because this isn't the challenge with online dating. The real challenge is that you don't have the benefit of that shared mutual space. If you meet somebody in the real physical world, you have, like, if it's the gym that you go to, like every time you go to the gym, you see that person there and you can kind of build around that. Like you don't have that additional supportive context. And so you can kind of very easily drop into a vortex of like non-communication. And then there's apparently these rules around, like, if somebody hasn't messaged you back after 3 days, it's because they're not interested. Or, if you message first and they don't message you back within a couple of hours, like there's all of this stuff. And you're like, am I reading too much into this? Is the internet telling me the truth? Or is this person just not interested in me? It is a minefield. So I'm several weeks in now to this dating world. And I have to say, I kind of feel like I've reached the point where I'm kind of done. I feel like I have connected so far with all the people that I have the bandwidth to connect with. I don't really have much more bandwidth to invest any more time or energy into these apps, because they just feel so vacuous. And frankly, without moving to meeting people in person, I don't believe that it's possible to discern anything more about whether there's the possibility for a level of connection beyond what you've had so far, because it does fall into this sort of limbo space. And maybe that's just that the dynamics aren't the right dynamics. Maybe if you connect with the right person, maybe you can message on text with a complete stranger forever. I mean, I don't really get how that could work, but I'm very comfortable with being, put right on that. So where I'm at right now is I'm going to come off the apps for now. I just feel like I'm there. I feel like I'm done. I don't really want to entertain any more of this sort of matching and swiping and stuff. The people that I've met and connected with so far, that's cool. If that goes somewhere, awesome. If not, then maybe I'll contemplate going back on, but I think it's unlikely, because I really don't enjoy them. So my plan going forward will be to venture into the real world. I'm thinking of contemplating things like maybe speed dating, maybe some salsa classes, maybe some networking events, because I just think hiding behind your phone isn't a way to build a relationship and rapport. We're human beings, we're not machines. We need to be out there in real life, interacting, seeing whether our energy matches, seeing whether our personalities vibe, whether we can hold conversation, whether we can laugh. These are things that apps just can't emulate. You know, I want to go to a gig. I want to go see a show. I want to go hang out. It's like, let's see whether we actually get on in real life. Like that for me is a much better option than all of this sitting on your phone and looking at photographs and swiping and matching. Like, no. So the art of communication for me, I feel, in the world of online dating is lost. I don't follow the rules. I don't understand the rules, and I don't like rules anyway. I'm not somebody that enjoys following rules, clearly. And I'm not into playing games either. I feel like there's a lot of game playing on these apps, and I think that just means that in their present form, they're not for me. So on that note, I wish I had more advice and wisdom to share on what the art of communicating is in the online dating world. I don't. I can only share what hasn't worked for me and what has worked. And if that can help anybody that's listening, then great. Equally, if you have any tips and advice on what has worked for you, then in the show notes are my contact details. I would love to know, like, seriously, what are you doing that's working? Are you having a much more successful success rate than I am? Maybe the fact that I really just can't be bothered is one of the key blockers. Who knows? But on all of that, thank you so much for listening. I'm really loving the feedback that I'm receiving for the pod. There's a real mix as well of guys listening as well as girls, which is very, very, very cool. So thank you so much for taking the time. And if you can relate to anything that I've shared on today's show, then it would genuinely be really cool to hear your comments. So ping them over. There's a bunch of you that I'm connected with on socials, and as mentioned again, my contact details are in the show notes, so feel free to hit me up. And yeah, if this is an episode that you think could maybe help a single friend, then do feel free to share it, because it is a minefield out there, and maybe there's strength in numbers. Who knows? But that's a wrap. Thank you again for listening to the Single Era Diaries. Date safely out there. Please date safely, and peace out. The Single Era Diaries is produced and distributed by Nascent Media and executive produced by me, Jade Graham. Podcasts grow by being liked and shared. So if you enjoyed today's show, then please be sure to like and share with a friend who you think will enjoy the show too. Subscribe, and if you have a moment to rate and review wherever it is that you listen to your podcast, that would be super appreciated too. Thank you for listening, and peace out.